as you recognize truth, the best way to test it is in your life experience. If something comes up that snags the mind again, that's a gift. Because it's just, oh, wow, the mind still gets snagged on that. So you can let go. You can just simply watch it, notice that even that too is awareness, or you can allow yourself to see through it to what's underlying or its source. But also the important thing is to not fight it. What happens if you fight any experience? It's really just the mind fighting with itself. Welcome to Letting Go and the Greatest Secret, where we explore the end of your suffering and the beginning of lasting happiness. I'm Hale Dwoskin, and in today's special episode, I will be interviewed by Peter Dziuban, who is featured along with me in Rhonda Byrne's book, The Greatest Secret. Peter Dziuban writes, teaches, and coaches on spirituality and consciousness. He's the author of Consciousness is All and Simply Notice. Clear awareness is the key to happiness, love, and freedom.
You've been doing podcasts for quite a while, very skilled and experienced, obviously. And let's take, though, maybe just more recently, the Letting Go and the Greatest Secret podcasts in particular. Yes. If you could, well, just share with us maybe what is, if anything, different now from when before they started? Anything for you?
Actually, first off, I'll say that they started because, as you know, Rhonda did this book that we're both in, and we had this idea early on that it'd be really fun. Pete Bissonette, who is the man who runs Learning Strategies, and I had this idea. Actually, he had the idea and he told me about it, and I thought it was a good idea, that it'd be really nice to interview the people in The Greatest Secret and just have, as you know, they've been more conversations, just have a conversation about what's in the book, to broaden it, to fill in holes so people could really talk more in depth about their teachings. And I wanted to do that so to give more exposure to the teachers, but also my network. I wanted them to have more of a living human experience of the people in the book. Mm-hmm. And also what's been very nice about this is I've been teaching now since off and on since 1977, mostly on. But a lot of the time I've just been focused on what's arising through this body mind, and also the teachings of my original teacher, Lester Levinson. And so in a lot of ways, I kind of lost touch with how many of the other contemporary non-dual teachers are teaching. And so what's been very nice for me as we've been doing these podcasts is to connect with all of the other people in this community. It's been wonderful for me just to broaden my circle of friends, because usually I'm just dealing with people who come to me for support or assistance or what they think they can get from me. But to talk to people who are doing the same thing and hear their experience has been really fun for me. And the other thing that's been really nice is I've been, I've been doing this again because just it feels right to me. It's coming, it comes from source. I don't really think about what I say before I say it very often. And if I do, I try not to say that, because that's probably the mind trying to get in the help, which it still does occasionally.
Yeah.
So what's been nice is hearing everyone else's perspective has actually caused me to go deeper into my own living experience of truth. Because what it done is it kind of validated all these things that I've been saying to other people, but without any feedback except noticing what happened to them. Obviously, I would say these things and people would transform and become more living embodiment of truth themselves. So that was enough. But to hear other people describe how they do it, their teachings, just was just reaffirming that, oh, we're all doing this together. It is the one self. And this was just another indicator of it. And it's been really fun for me to do that.
On a whole, these conversations, it's like a melting pot of the great variety of experience that is, when it comes to putting it into words or trying to, and it's just all getting mixed together by
Yeah,
life.
and that was part
And
of my intention too. Very often there's self-help and there's non-dual teachings, and in many often people feel as though there's a conflict between the two, where you have to choose one or the other. And because I grew up in a self-help community, even though I started having non-dual experience decades ago, I was always couching it in a way that it would be palatable, always trying to find ways to make it palatable for a much broader audience. And so what I did intentionally is I've been interviewing not just people who are non-dual teachers, but also just self-help teachers, a lot of whom were already my friends, people like I know from the original movie and book, The Secret, and asking them to discuss their vision of truth, whether it be non-dual or slightly dualistic, doesn't matter. Because they were already very open, positive, loving people who were helping people at the level they were, I figured getting them involved in the conversation too would be fun. And it's been very interesting to see how everything kind of supports each other and interconnects.
yeah, I've noticed that in watching some of the interviews. It's exactly that, as you say. Is there, maybe there isn't, any one or two standout realizations or points or anything that you've gotten from this that you'd want to share?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, well, one of the things that I liked is not so much as a realization as almost like I got this inner permission to go deeper into something I've been doing all along. For a long time, I've talked to people about how that which you are is always right here, right now. What comes and goes is the persona or the mind. That's actually not here most of the time. And one of the places that we get caught is that we try to get back to a good experience. We try to get back to the natural state. And it's the natural state looking away from itself, trying to get back to itself, which
Yeah.
is silly.
Yeah.
And so what happened is as listening to other teachers, I realized that they have their own unique ways of describing this. And what I started to see is that I could help people explore the natural state even more than I had been. That's always been a hobby of mine, actually. It's a weird hobby, but for decades now, the thing I love to explore if I had free time was are there any boundaries to this? Are there textures, colors, anything? And of course, you don't find any of that. But I kept exploring it. And the other thing I've always been passionate about, or for decades have been passionate about, is how can I, in just a few words, give people little things, explorations they can do in just a few minutes to recognize that which they truly are. And so what's happened is having these conversations has inspired more of that within me, including helping people recognize that, and Rupert talks about this, and so does Shakti Karurimagi. But I hadn't really talked about it the way they did, but I was doing it with people without realizing, and that is that it's just the first step, recognizing that you are awareness. You're not your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas, the body, the mind. That's where you have to start there, in my opinion. And some people don't, and some people just have this all-in-one experience, and they skip a lot of the steps. But that first recognition has to be that you're not that sense of limitation that you usually identify with. But that's not the end. The other thing that I've been saying to people for decades is, well, what is that appearing in or on? And I realized, let's help people explore that even more, because that awareness that you are doesn't end at your skin. And so I started going even more in my teaching with people, even, and again, it's not new, but I've been taking it deeper, is just really helping people see that all experiencing of the body, the mind, the world, that's all happening within awareness. And then even beyond that, helping people see that there is only the one awareness. Again, something I've said, but I've been helping people discover that more experientially, that one awareness that I am, that you are, is really that. It's one. There's not me, there's not the body and awareness, there's just awareness. And having that, finding ways to help people see that has been really fun. And again, it's something a lot of the teachings that come through this body mind are not, actually, it's all not premeditated. But what happens is, when I'm in front of someone who comes to me with an issue, and it often starts with an issue, again, because of the self-help background, what comes out is a way to help them first see through the issue, but then see through the one who thinks they have an issue. And then see through even that to just resting as, or being, or abiding as that truth of who they are. And so, again, as I talk about this, I realize I've been doing this for decades, but for some reason it's crystallized more over the past year or so. Even it started crystallizing more even in the process of thinking of developing this podcast. And also, I recently re-released a book from that I wrote originally with Lester Levinson. Although I wrote the book and edited it, Lester had already passed, or actually the first time it was written, he was still alive, but it was called Keys to the Ultimate Freedom. But he had very little to do with it. It was just excerpts from his talks. But because Rhonda was coming out with this new book, The Greatest Secret, I decided, instead of having it be 5 books, which it was then, and they were all just ebooks, I decided to go back, combine it. And it had been 20 years since I wrote that book. And I purposely at the time held back a lot of, part of how I started in this career of doing what I did, is finding ways to make Lester's teachings too more accessible to people, because a lot of people misinterpreted the things he said. So when I first did the book, I kept my commentary very short. It's not long now, but it's longer. And I shared less of the Sedona method and also all our non-dual teachings. So in the new book, I share a lot more of the Sedona method and a lot more of our non-dual teachings as a bridge to help people integrate what Lester was pointing at. And that also, in doing that, that also opened things up even more. And again, I wasn't looking for an opening. It just kind of happened spontaneously.
Interesting. And so, if I understood you correctly, that will be a new edition of Keys to
No, it
Ultimate.
already is.
Oh,
I did that. I worked on that even before the pod, or some of it was
I
concurrently.
see.
But before the podcast, I released the book around the same time that Rhonda's book came out, the new book.
Okay.
In fact, Rhonda wrote the forward to it
Oh,
because
okay.
she's had the keys to the ultimate freedom has been on her bedstand for
Yes,
decades.
well, she told me that in an email about uh, what have been some of the most valuable things she's come across in her path. And that was one of them. And
Yes.
I have a book with that title, or it's very similar. So, but I thought, I don't have the one Rhonda's talking about. And I looked for it and I couldn't find it. I mean,
Well,
this is
because
very
Keys is,
recently.
yes, no, because Keys has been out of print for a while
Oh,
because it was printed in the 90s, towards the end of Lester's life. I had to fight him. It's a funny story.
oh,
He didn't really want his teachings going out. He just wanted
really?
the newer teachings of the Sedona method, because what happened is he taught a particular way for a few decades, but he did it just one-on-one and in small groups, and it wasn't formalized into a system. That the Sedona method was formalized into a system with his help in the early 70s. And at that time, he moved away from teaching the way he had been doing. He actually never wanted to be in front of a room. It wasn't something he ever wanted to do.
Mm.
So he was thrilled to have other people teaching the Sedona method to other people. And he could just kind of coach them and keep them on track. And
I
that's
see.
how I got into teaching I became one of his teachers started training for that. I took the first training in 77 and then got into it much more intensively in the early 80s, around 81. But uh, so in 2001, we released I wrote a 5-book series of taking all of Lester's older teachings uh, that were in the Keys book and released a book called Happiness is Free and It's
Yeah.
Easier Than You Think.
Yep.
And then some of those went out of print, and then there was just ebooks, and then I decided to put it all back together.
I see. Okay, good. Maybe a lot of folks will be interested in that. This actually thought just came prior to us having this recording session,
Yes.
and it was a lot. These interviews get a lot of views,
Yes.
and I myself do not have children, but I would expect that a lot of the viewers do.
Yes.
And is there anything simple, because you like to keep it simple, say to the parents about how whatever they've gotten from this series of immersion in all these podcasts, how they could put that to practical use or benefit in their family for their children? And
That's a good question.
maybe it's something as simple as living it rather than verbal instruction or
Yes.
whatever. I don't
There you
know.
go.
What do you say?
Well, I was going to say something very similar. In my experience with teaching the young children the Sedona method and encouraging parents to support their children, what I've always said is the most important thing is to live the teaching.
Mm.
If you're early on, when it was more focused on just letting go, not so much recognizing truth, I'd said your letting go opens you to being a more present, loving, nurturing parent.
Yeah.
And that's all your children really want. If you lead by example, and then even as you recognize the truth of who you are as a parent, you don't need to consciously try to modify your behavior or do parenting differently. You'll find just by letting go and living your own truth, the effect you have on your children is, and this is also feedback I've gotten from people going through this, is very profound, because you're living it, you tend to make that available for them, as long as you don't try to impose it on them. And also they need to go through, especially young children, need to have a healthy, functioning, imaginary, separate individual that they're dealing with in the beginning. Otherwise they can't function in life. Once they're functioning in life, then they can come to this, as we did as a little older, and can explore these truths for themselves. But forcing it on too young of children, I think, would actually interfere with their developmental process. So
Sure, yeah.
the best thing is to live it, and to be as loving a parent as you can from your heart, and the rest of it takes care of itself. You'll be intuitively
Sure.
guided.
Yeah. Love knows what it's doing.
It sure does.
Yeah. Very nice. Going in a little different direction here.
Sure.
We, as you get deeper into this, or maybe better said, the separate sense of a separate self dissolves.
Yes.
Things become clear, like as you started saying back at the beginning about awareness, and it's all inclusive. There's nothing outside of it.
Yes.
It's really the substance of experience.
Yes.
Maybe a way to put it. And when the illusion of time and space has been seen through,
Yes.
there's then this, and that love is the self, just another
Yes.
word for it.
Yes.
And it's an aware, intelligent love,
Yes.
everywhere present, already present.
Yes.
So there's, and again, it's distanceless. So it's as if there's this immediacy of love that is being the entirety of what exists, is
Yes.
just okay. Having said that, what are the implications of that?
Oh,
It's
okay.
like there's a knowing that it's the fact. Okay, so where do you go from there?
Well, that's actually a great question, because sometimes there's a tendency, and it's also in certain traditions, that you need to protect this in some way. Once you start to see it, you have to withdraw from life. You have to be careful not to get caught back up into your mind. And I really think that's not a really good idea at all. The only part of discovering truth, that which you truly are, is to be able to live it fully in a completely embodied life experience. If you're holding back from life, then there's still attachment and aversion. There's still a separate individual who thinks they could lose something. And so what happens is, as you recognize truth, the best way to test it is in your life experience. If something comes up that snags the mind again, that's a gift. Because it's just, oh, wow, the mind still gets snagged on that. So you can let go. You can just simply watch it. Notice that even that too is awareness. Or you can allow yourself to see through it, to what's underlying or its source. But also the important thing is to not fight it. What happens if you fight any experience? It's really just the mind fighting with itself. And as you allow yourself to embody this as best you can in life, it does naturally change behavior and thinking. Thinking, first off, gets a lot quieter.
Yeah.
What falls away is all the psychological drama that most of us live in our heads. And what's left is just this spaciousness and openness that allows you to function actually better in life. Yet it doesn't feel like you're doing it. It feels like you're being done.
Yes. Yes.
And so, you've probably heard that, and it is important in the beginning to withdraw a little from life in order to, inwardly at least, so that you can really recognize this. For most of us, we need to go through that phase, but you don't want to just stay there, because if you do, then you start defending against whatever's left to be recognized as untrue. You want to recognize all that as untrue, because every time that happens, there's a greater solidity that now awareness itself is unchanging, but the mind becomes more and more cooperative to this living understanding. At first, it's running interference. It's like, yeah, you don't want to think about that now. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I mean, it can keep you really busy. But as you live this, as you embrace whatever the mind is throwing up, but also just embrace life fully, what happens is the mind starts to be a willing, cooperative participant in this natural unfolding that happens. And that is I've heard, I think I've heard other teachers, including Rupert and Shakti, say that this is the beginning of the spiritual path. The recognition that you are awareness is just the beginning. And I agree with that. It's just an opening or a beginning. That's why years ago, I don't know, you probably remember this, but in the 90s, people made a really big deal about recognizing that they were awareness. It was like, oh, I'm enlightened, or I've awakened, or I've had an awakening. And from the very beginning, when that happened in my seminars, it was like we just went on. It was like it was nothing at all. It's like, yeah, that's what's natural. So don't get stuck there. That's a beginning place. It's not an ending place.
Yeah.
And so everything, I agree with everything you said, but to make it practical for the people listening to this, don't make a big deal out of self-recognition. It's what's natural.
Right.
And it's not like you're awakened. The more you recognize the truth of who you are, the less there's any sense of a you doing it, because you've always been that. I remember one of the things that's happened over the years, looking back at Hale and his life, is that these type of recognitions were happening before, but without understanding. In other words, I had tastes that sometimes lasted minutes, but sometimes lasted days or weeks, of just being in these states of profound peace and acceptance. And at the time, I thought it had to do with the fact I just released something huge. So I went back into working at releasing. And I didn't realize that it was until looking back at it that those were times where the mind had dropped away and there was no process needed. And so I got engaged in process over and over again, because I didn't recognize that at the time. Again, it wasn't until the 90s that I started recognizing that, yes, process is totally secondary. And in fact, the beginning of this was, I had just led a seminar and I was feeling, and that was the other thing. From the very beginning, when I taught the Sedona method, Hale would drop away and the teaching would just happen. And this is back into the 80s, actually into the late 70s. And I thought that was just normal. I didn't realize that was a big deal about it. So, but what happened is I had just led a seminar and I was sitting with a good friend of mine and we were having, I think it was Japanese food in New York. And and I realized I had gotten back into, I was in this very open, peaceful, loving place, but I still heard, I could feel myself still searching or still grabbing or still doing a process. And I went, that's, I just had the thought that's unnecessary. And it dropped away. And that's when it's one of the first times I remember recognizing that this is what's been here all the time. There was this is not something new. This has always been here. And the it's not a doing to get to it, it's what already is. And in fact, what I help people do from there often is, so for a second, stop seeking. Just notice what already is.
Yeah.
And in doing that, because I'd had, I guess partially because I had a living experience of that, people could hear me and they went, oh, and just in the stopping, trying to do anything, what was always obvious became self-obvious to them as well.
Beautiful.
So,
yeah. Excuse me. When it's been lived and actually experienced, then that somehow comes through when it's spoken about after that point.
yes,
Does
yes,
that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And actually, I've always, this is, I've always been able to tell when someone's been really living it. And I think everyone can. Not everyone pays attention to that because, you know, sometimes you think it sounds good and that's enough. But I've always felt this too. I've always been attracted to the teachers that, in my experience, were the clearest, the clearest representatives of that which we all are. And it started actually, Lester introduced me to Ramana Maharshi in 1977. And I immediately was struck by how, first of all, how similar it was to what Lester was teaching. He actually said that the Ramana's teachings were the closest to his teachings from the East. And then I introduced Lester towards the end of his life. I was his caregiver as he died from cancer. Except the last few months, a friend of mine took over for that. But for most of the time, I was his caregiver. So someone had told me about Nisargadatta, and I picked up the book and started reading it, and I went, wow, this is really wonderful too. And so I started reading it to Lester as his bedtime reader. And he really liked that.
Nice, yeah.
And he told me that he would have loved to have met Nisargadatta.
For sure.
Yeah.
As you were talking back there a little ways, one thing sort of flashed in, which was, it can, especially maybe at the start, it's easy to get serious about this stuff,
yes.
overly serious.
Overly
and
serious, yeah.
It's when you were talking about being protective of it, kind of a little bit in the same territory.
Yes.
But talk a little bit about let's call it the delight factor instead.
Sure.
or you know, how essential that is to, it's like, you know, like they say that cliche about just reading the recipe instead of eating the meal.
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of.
Or trying to eat the menu in a restaurant.
Yeah.
That's another very similar one. Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, first off, anything the mind takes overly seriously, it's invested in. And if the mind's invested in it, then it's worth a little examination, because when the mind invests in something, it's made an illusion real.
Ah,
Even if it's a subtle illusion, it's made an illusion real. I mean, and so if you take this, now let me qualify this. Earnestness is critical.
yeah,
Being
for sure.
earnestly interested in the truth of who you are and allowing yourself to focus on that. It doesn't have to be to the exclusion of everything else, but give it at least as much energy as you give to or running away from life or getting lost in experience. That's critically important and very, very helpful. But it's also important to have a sense of humor, even about this. I remember and this happens spontaneously for most people. I remember when I first started seeing truth, there were these times where I couldn't stop laughing
Uh,
because it was so funny. And that actually started happening actually just in early on as I learned the Sedona method and started teaching it and practicing it. There were times that I just got something released and I would laugh for days. And one example was I was releasing something. It was a big issue that I'd been working on for a long period of time. I think this was the late 80s. And then all of a sudden this thought arose. Did I just let that go, or did it never really exist?
ah, wow.
And in recognizing that, uh, something just opened. First off, I laughed hysterically, but then what happened is for days, just things dissolved, unnamed things just dissolved out of consciousness.
Mm.
And this was even before I was aware, as fully aware of the truth of who I was. Again, I think I came in with a very fortunate lifetime that there's been all this natural support for me recognizing truth and seeing through illusion. But anyway, back to the question. Yes, this isn't serious, and it is exquisitely beautiful. If it's feeling flat or blank, you've probably gotten to the stage where you've recognized that your awareness, but there is that clinging still, and there's still two. There's you awareness and everything else. And that can seem very flat or blank, and it can also seem serious. But as you recognize the depth of that awareness that you are and the limitlessness nature of it, then it becomes fun. Then the love that you are naturally shines forth on and as everything and everyone, and the beauty that is both the manifestation, but even the beauty that is that apparent sense of limitation is just as beautiful. It's all beautiful. And so all this, again, is not something you have to make happen. It happens spontaneously as you are persistent, as you keep exploring this, as you keep opening to truth. And, there's also this belief that for many people that, you either get it or you don't. And to me, that's a big trap. And what I mean by that is people think they have to get it intellectually. And they keep trying to put it into an intellectual box. And each time you do that, you're crushing that natural alive awareness that you are. It doesn't fit. It makes up every box.
Right.
And it's in every box, but it's also the box and it's outside of the box.
Right.
And when you try to package it, you're limiting it.
Yeah, you're just doing a conceptual number on yourself.
Exactly.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, just explore it and not try to define it or confine it in any way. If you can describe it, in words or in experiences, you're probably, and it might be beautiful, but you're probably describing the side effects, not that which you are. That which you are is colorless, it's tasteless, it's dimensionless. And it's, at the same time, there's an exquisite beauty in that spills out into everything else, even though that's not separate.
Very nice. As you were talking there, what came up was, it's so funny how at first there's this intense desire to grasp, to get it, get it, and then as it goes along, thanks to the nature of awareness, the freedom and the limitlessness, it completely turns around. And there's this feeling of, wait a minute, I don't want to know anything. I don't want to know anything. That's such a contraction, to know. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
To put it in a box, as you said, and try and confine it that way. But no, just wide open. And as you were saying earlier too, you don't want to have that sense, because it's very limiting, of I've arrived, I'm there, I'm at the end, because that's an incredible limit too. There's always going to be unfoldment. While true, awareness is always already at itself, but it's infinite, so it can't go only so far. There's going to continue to be unfoldment of all these varieties. So
yeah, it's beautiful to watch too.
Yeah,
it's beautiful to watch in several ways. One, watch it unfold within this body mind that awareness is using to experience the world. But it's also beautiful to watch the awareness that all is unfolding through so many others in so many unique and beautiful ways. Now, I'm not talking just about all the other teachers. I'm talking about everyone who's in this direction in my experience, they're these lights illuminating this shared experience. And it's really fun to watch the lights come back on in people. It's not that it's never not there, but it's usually in the background for most people. But as they start to shed their sense of limitation, that awareness that they are is shining through more and more and it's not like there's two awarenesses. It's not, or two eyes, the limited eye and the true eye. There's just one. It's experiencing through all, even the people who appear to be still totally lost in their personal stories and dramas. It's still that one awareness.
Yeah.
And again, to me, that there's a beauty in that, and there's no need to try to fix anyone or change them. They're perfect as they are.
Yeah.
Yet if someone comes to you, and they're wanting this, then whatever it is that can be done to support them is what happens.
This is one that came up, just popped in anticipation of a chance to have this conversation.
Yes.
The tendency is naturally for us we hear so much about there's only the now, there's only timeless being, just the word being itself. It's eternity, it's timeless. And there's, again, because this is how the experience seems to happen, there's a tendency to sort of start from the apparent time-space world where we're totally run by time, the sense of time, and then a waking up out of that into nowness, omnipresentness, isness, beingness, and wonderful. But what opens up, what would you say on this when sort of the perspective is turned around and not seeing oneself as having awakened out of a prior time experience, but that the one that's being alive and conscious right now is the now itself. It's really not an us, as we know. But we sometimes, I catch this all the time in myself, have this hangover notion that the real me, that, it gets mixed up, that there's been this
Oh,
turning
sure.
away from time to this. But what I wanted to have you do was just share a little bit about, okay, how about from the other direction?
Well, from the
From
other direction, first off, time is still a useful tool as long as you know that's all it is. I mean,
hmm.
we had in order for us to have this conversation, we had
True,
to
true,
agree upon a time
true, true.
to have the conversation. Yet at the same time, if you look at your direct experience, you've never actually experienced time.
Mm.
You've only experienced what is now. That's it. There's not, and there isn't moments of time either. There's not now, now, now. It's not that
Right.
either. It's just now, period. And even now, for some, well, people hear now and then they think of, well, there's now and then there's then. It's not even that. There is no then either. There's just
Right.
now. And so from that perspective, there's no efforting. The body mind does what it needs to do to deal with the apparency of time. Yet the living experience is unbroken,
Mm.
is just this one living now. And there, yet the other thing that happens for most of us is as we taste this, each time we do it, it feels more solid, it feels more real, it feels more open. But we don't realize that every time time seems to reassert itself, that's okay. That again is like our other sense of limitation. If it seems that you're caught in time again, it's just the mind caught in time. That's never been you.
Right.
And so you can watch the mind get caught up in whatever it does. And there's a process that people go through. For most of us, what we do is as the mind comes and goes, the time and mind are actually synonyms. There's no mind without time, and there's no time without mind. They're not two.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so as time / mind / imaginary limitation comes and goes, each time it goes, it doesn't come back fully.
Mm.
Each time it goes, it comes back more like Swiss cheese
Uh-huh.
or
Uh-huh.
more like a sieve.
Yeah.
The mind can, and so again, I mentioned this already, but I want to emphasize this as we kind of wrap up. I want to emphasize to people, just know that every time you recognize that which you truly are, it's a gift from you to yourself, but also it's not something you need to cling to. It's something that is natural, it's spontaneous, it's coming from you, and it is you recognizing it. And that little you that you used to think you were never was separate from that. And you're not the limited, apparently limited separate you that you often still may feel like you are. That has always been the one awareness playing a role through you. It's the way the one awareness experiences life at first from that perspective, and then from this mixed perspective, and then as this pure awareness that's already gone through this experience of life, but is no longer touched or colored by it in any way. And just allow that progression to happen for you naturally without trying to set up camp anywhere.
Anything else? Or I'm going to do a Hale. I noticed this in a lot of your podcasts. If you could leave us with one thing, maybe you've already said it, one statement, whatever, what would it be?
So that which is listening to this conversation is that which we've been talking about. And so just know that you already are and have always been that which you've sought. You have been seeking yourself as yourself. And you've never been apart from that which you are. And even if this is not always clear to you, even if it still feels like there's coming and going of the mind, know that you are changeless. You've never gone anywhere. Let the mind come and go as it does. And know that you are that which is aware of the comings and goings. And celebrate that. Enjoy it. Enjoy what unfolds moment to moment. And just be the love that you are in action. Even though you're not acting, let it act through you as you. And you'll find that love has no boundaries and no limits. I hope you enjoyed our conversation between Peter Dziuban and me. You can learn more about Peter Dziuban and listen to free recordings by visiting his website at consciousnessisall.com. That's consciousnessisall.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe so you have immediate access to future episodes. Please give us a 5-star rating and share it with the people you care about. If you'd like to learn more about my work, my mentor Lester Levinson's work, and the Sedona method, please visit www.sedona.com. As you explore our site, you'll learn the key to lasting happiness, success, peace, and emotional well-being. We have books, courses, events, and plenty of free material to explore. Again, go to sedona.com. That's SEDONA.com. Thank you for being here, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Letting Go and the Greatest Secret.